Good. Warm welcome. Could please find your seats. Warm welcome to this event on EU enlargement, and more specifically the Commission's enlargement package, which was presented yesterday. And also a warm welcome to those of you following us online. The event is organized by the Commission representation here in Copenhagen and think tank Europa. And well, if you look into the calendar, well, you don't have to look into the calendar today because we all know which date it is. It's the 9th of November, the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I'm sure that you'll agree with me that you could not find a better day or date to have this discussion about EU enlargement, because on the 9th of November, 1989, Europe changed. The kidnapped West, to quote Milan Kundera, the Czech author, he said once that Central Europe was the kidnapped West, and well, now it returned in 1989. So after the 24th of February last year, history is back, one could say. The maps of Europe, both the physical ones and the mental ones, are once again changing. A lot is at stake, I think we can all agree, or to paraphrase Milan Kundera and Emmanuel Macron, the French president, in one sentence: Europe should not be kidnapped a second time. But that will require a lot of effort, both from the present and the future member states. Moving from 27 to possibly 36 member states is actually not an enlargement. It is more a transformation of the European Union. And the very fact that we are for the first time then also negotiating with a country at war only underlines that this is a very special accession round that we are about to embark upon. And that history is in the making was also very much the core message yesterday when the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen presented the enlargement package. I quote, "Responding to the call of history, we must now work on accelerating and completing the European Union," quote unquote. And, excuse me, it's a bit, maybe you could not chat there, but be a little bit silent. Sorry, good. In order to elaborate on all this and make us a lot wiser, I will now see whether I can go live to Brussels. Is that possible? Yes, it's possible. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. Can you wave if you can hear me? Say hello. Copenhagen calling Brussels. Yes, you are there. Perfect. Gert Jan Koopman, you are Director General of the DG Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations. So you are a very busy man. You have been basically working, I presume, for the last many weeks on this big package that was presented yesterday. So maybe we should just start before we get into the nitty-gritties and the technical stuff with that overall remark by the Commission President that this is a call of history. So why is this enlargement round actually so important, seen from your point of view? So over to you, and thank you so much for doing this. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you in Copenhagen. Good to be with you, even if it is virtually. Let me pick up on where you left it. The call of history, certainly, because what makes this enlargement different from previous enlargements is that it is taking place in a very different geopolitical context. And much as previous enlargements have been important economically, socially, this enlargement is really fundamentally also relevant to ensure that our security and peace on the continent can be preserved. That really is the call of history the President was referring to, and that makes this enlargement particularly important, timely, and urgent. Now, let me add to this that it doesn't mean that this enlargement would be less merit-based. In other words, this enlargement will also, as all enlargements, have to respect the principle that the countries acceding to the EU will have to respect and fully implement the Union's standards, move up to the Union's standards. So the urgency that flows from the geopolitical context and the necessity that is attached to it actually mean that we have to take this merit-based approach, this approach which is essential to preserve the integrity of our union, even more seriously, and work very, very hard, especially in the acceding countries, but also in the Commission, to ensure that this is achieved. That, I think, is a little bit the background against which we are working, and the extremely powerful transformative effect that enlargement has had economically, socially, is really very necessary. If you allow me a little anecdote, yesterday evening I was discussing the relation between Poland and Ukraine with a Ukrainian high-level representative, and he reminded me that when he was a student many years ago, he had Polish friends, and he said that at the time when both countries were just coming out of the Iron Curtain, the Ukrainians were looking down a little bit on the Poles who were coming to Ukraine to sell chewing gum and other little tidbits. They were seen as the poor cousins, whereas Ukraine was thinking of itself as an industrial powerhouse, was richer, was more affluent. Fast forward to today, one country is already a member state, has been a member state for many years, and has grown incredibly affluent compared to Ukraine, the other country. 3 million Ukrainians, even before the war, are working in Poland to keep the Polish economy going, which is in need of labor force because it's growing so fast that the indigenous labor force cannot actually sustain it. So it is just an illustration of what enlargement and the union mean in these countries. Similarly, I was in Lithuania a few weeks ago discussing with the Lithuanian negotiators of enlargement, and actually all of the Baltics negotiators of enlargement, how the process has come about and what it has meant for their countries. And it was just very interesting to note that Lithuania, since enlargement, has seen its economy growing 400%. I repeat, 400%. Vilnius is now a richer city than most cities in the EU, richer than the average. So again, the transformative effect is enormous. And it's not just an economically transformative effect. Our way of living in Europe, our fundamental values, the rules set out in the treaties and which are declined a little bit differently in every member state, of course, taking account of our specificities, also provide a way of living which is free, which gives people opportunity to be who they are, to, as our president said, to love who they want to love, to operate how they want to operate. And this is also very powerful, not something that we can take for granted in the countries surrounding us. So I'm not saying all these things as an advert for the European Union, but it's worth reminding citizens of the older member states, and you in Copenhagen, and I am originally from the Netherlands, we are citizens of older member states, tend to sometimes forget that, how powerful it is. My final illustration is what happened yesterday evening in the streets of Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, that was granted candidate status. There were literally thousands of people on the street waving European and Georgian flags. Children and teenagers were in tears for the simple fact that the Commission has recommended to the Council that their country should become a candidate. So the idea of Europe, which we sometimes forget to take seriously enough in the older member states, is actually a powerful motivator for many countries around us. And at a time where we have war on the European continent, where the world around us has become arguably a much less safe space, we should cherish this reality. And that is why enlargement is so important. Now, the enlargement report presented yesterday by the Commission made indeed momentous proposals. It proposed to the Council that we should open accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. On the completion of a number of outstanding steps, we should also adopt a negotiating framework, maybe already in March. And I would like to add to it that in addition to Georgia becoming a candidate status following our recommendation, we've also suggested that negotiations with Bosnia-Herzegovina should begin once the necessary conditions are fulfilled. So these are big steps. We had 6 Western Balkans candidate countries. I'm leaving Turkey aside for obvious reasons for the time being. Now we have 9, and the 3 new ones are racing ahead in the east. So the second message of this report was really about the Western Balkans and what we can do to help to make enlargement a more realistic prospect in this region. We should not forget that whilst there has been progress, and more progress in the last year than in a long time, nevertheless, progress in the Western Balkans has clearly not been as fast as it should have been. With some countries we have been negotiating for over a decade. And that is partly, if we're honest, also a result of the fact that we ourselves, for a while, didn't really want it so badly, and that they felt this equally, and that they toned down the pace of their reforms. So there is this well-worn joke about enlargement in the Western Balkans, that they are pretending to reform and we're pretending that we want them in. That is actually, in reality, not just a recipe for cynicism and for a disappointment, but it's also a motivator for many people to leave the region. Young people in the region are leaving in the tens of thousands. And in a context where the Western Balkans, which for many centuries have been an area where the great powers used to play out their schemes, in this new geopolitical context, the risks that this type of First World War power struggle in the Western Balkans returns is very real, with Russia clearly eyeing the Western Balkans, with Turkey playing a new role, and also Chinese enterprises being quite prominent. So also in the Western Balkans, the geopolitical reality we are faced with dictates that we have to change course. Now, to do this, we need, in our view, to reinvigorate the process. And this is why the Commission has proposed a growth strategy for the Western Balkans that is based on a 4-pillar plan that essentially aims at integrating them step by step into the internal market even before they are members, on the condition that, of course, they meet the necessary requirements in those areas. And secondly, that this is done in a way that is consistent with them, amongst themselves, completing their own common regional market, which is the internal market of the Western Balkans, which at the moment is not proceeding as fast as it should, because there are many difficult, intractable differences between many of these countries, which hold back the realization of the common regional market. And what we have said is, listen, this is not acceptable. If we grant you access to our internal market, then a condition of this will be that you give access to your neighbors in the common regional market, so that we create one big integrated economic space covering the Western Balkans and the EU. Now, just to give you one statistic, the common regional market, on a conservative estimate, if it is completed, would add 10% to the GDP of these economies. These economies stand at 35% of EU average in terms of incomes per head. So this is significant. Bringing them into the internal market would unlock the growth rates we have seen in newly acceding countries 25 years ago. But we know that to do this, and that brings me to the third and fourth pillar, hard reforms are necessary. Many of these reforms are actually necessary for enlargement, especially when it comes to the fundamentals, as we call it in Brussels, or the rule of law, the fight against corruption, putting in place a modern administration, and ensuring that property rights are protected. These things are essential for any modern market economy, for any trust in investing in societies. And therefore, they are not just essential for the accession process, but they're essential to ignite economic growth. So one set of reforms we are requiring to be accelerated relate to the fundamentals. There's a second set of reforms which we think are essential, which relate more to the business environment, to socio-economic reforms. Education levels and vocational training in the region are not at the level of the EU. We have problems of registering property. We have problems of investment climate more generally. So these socioeconomic reforms are also very important to unlock the growth. And the ambition, therefore, of this plan, in addition to the internal market piece, is to provide very strong incentive for these two types of reforms. And we have suggested that we do that through the mechanism that we're actually implementing in the EU, which is the Next Generation EU, the recovery plans, which we introduced a few years ago, where essentially you get paid for reforms. And this is a big change in the way we organize the budget. So you don't get paid on the basis of fulfilling general conditions, but you only get paid if you perform. We don't apply that logic yet in the field of external relations with our candidate countries. And the sea change that we're now proposing is to build an instrument that is essentially the Western Balkans Next Generation EU, to apply exactly the same logic. So with that, we would require them to develop reform agendas, plans per country, setting out these reforms, and we would make funds available for them, which would be released upon completion of the reforms. The money that they would receive under this instrument would have to be spent on investments, for which we have a mechanism called the Western Balkans Investment Framework already today, which funds big infrastructure investments, absolutely fundamental to connect them between themselves and with the internal market. And we propose that half of the resources that we would make available should be allocated to this. The other half should go to their national budgets to fund the costs of the reforms. Think about educational investment, think about all of the hard reforms that are going to require outlays to finance them. So the logic here is that we would be setting out in the reform plans, just like we do for the member states, the hard reforms that they have unfortunately not made sufficiently, that these would be incentivized and rewarded. We are actually making this a race to the top. So we have proposed that if the countries do not manage to complete the reforms within a delay of 1 year of the schedule that we would include in these plans, then they would lose the money and the money would go to their neighbors. That's a very powerful incentive. These countries are all jealously looking at each other, and the last thing they will want is that their lack of success rewards their neighbors. So we're introducing some market-based incentives in this plan as well. Now, in terms of funding, what we have proposed is to add 2 billion euros of grants, 4 billion euros of loans, 6 billion euros over 4 years, so 1.5 per year for the 6 countries, which would, roughly speaking, double their allocation that they receive at the moment. But as I have just explained, it would be fully conditional on making the necessary reforms, and it would be fully geared towards financing the reforms and financing requisite infrastructure investments. So it's a very modern policy, very results-based policy. The 4 billion we can borrow against the a guarantee in the budget against provisioning. The 2 billion we do not have in the budget, and we have already included that in our proposal for a revision of the MFF that is being discussed right now. We made that proposal in July of last year. We believe that if you look at the combined effect of the common regional market, integrating them into the single market progressively, and ensuring that these reforms are undertaken with vigor and combined with additional investments, this should be able to double the size of their economy over the next decade. And that would be genuinely transformational. The Western Balkans would look totally different if we achieve this. What is more, by doing this, we would actually accelerate the enlargement process, because the hard fundamental reforms that are holding back in reality the progress on the enlargement track would actually be hard conditions for receiving the money. In the process, we would also require regional problems to be solved. I'm referring here specifically to the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, the difficulties between Serbia and Kosovo, where normalization of relations in northern Kosovo and between the two countries is necessary. for which a implementation roadmap has been negotiated with responsibilities and obligations on both parties, but which is not being implemented sufficiently well. So this would also be part of the mix. In other words, the growth plan for the Western Balkans is not just an economic growth plan, it's also an accession accelerator. So that is the second part of this enlargement package, which therefore I think in the aggregate is really historical. It would foresee a huge push in the East and a genuine offer to the Western Balkans to really come on board of the high-speed train that has left the station in the East and that we also want to see replicated in the Western Balkans. With that, maybe I close my presentation. I look forward to any comments and questions that you may have. Over to you, Copenhagen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, also for reminding us of the old joke about pretending that basically that the EU is pretending that want to enlarge with Western Balkans, and they were pretending that they were reforming. So we can now agree that good old Eric Clapton pretending is not a song that we should sing anymore, at least not in this enlargement context. Thank you also for highlighting sort of what has not really stirred a lot of debate or news coverage in Denmark, the growth plan for the Western Balkans. I think that was very important for us, also for the future debate that we'll have about enlargement. But let me, obviously, because that is what has really sort of been the core of the debate at the moment, also the media coverage, that was Ukraine. And there we can see that the Commission recommends, and we should all remember that you can only recommend. At the end of the day, it will be the European Council that has to agree upon whether one should open negotiations. But where do you see the core problems where Ukraine still has to prepare better and has to improve its various reforms before one can then pursue with the so-called negotiation framework? So what are the areas? I mean, you mentioned, for instance, when you read the papers, minority rights, but could you just elaborate a bit more upon that? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, we set out last year in our report 7 steps that we felt needed to be fulfilled, and they were very demanding, essentially covering the modernization of their justice system, the fight against corruption, money laundering, de-oligarchization, if you can pronounce this without stuttering, you're an enlargement expert, de-oligarchization, give it a try, as well as protecting minority rights in the process. Now, we have translated these 7 steps into a very detailed roadmap, which is much more disaggregated. I won't go into too many details here. And we've worked very closely with Ukraine to ensure tracking of the necessary reforms under these 7 steps. And at this juncture, I'm very happy to report that they have completed more than 90% of the necessary reforms. 4 steps have been fully completed, 3 have nearly been completed. And I think we need to pause for a second and recognize that, this implies the root and branch reform, for example, of their justice system, including appointing very senior judges and prosecutors through vetting processes in which externals have the casting vote, so have a veto. I mean, just think about that a little bit, because that goes very, very far for a country that is literally at war to defend its sovereignty. But it has taken these commitments to clean up a justice system that clearly wasn't functional, was affected by corruption. It has also committed to setting up a completely parallel investigative, prosecutorial, and justice system to deal with high-level corruption for the very same reason. And I must say that, much as the geopolitical context dictates our work, we have been extremely rigorous in following these reforms to uphold the merit-based process, because there cannot be a choice between these 2 principles. They have to go hand in hand. And therefore, the missing elements are actually relatively limited. So what we propose in more detail is that on 4 points, they need to complete the to-do list under the 7 steps before the Council adopts the negotiating framework. And we have said that this would be subject of reporting by the Commission by March of next year. And the reason that we said March of next year is that obviously we have consulted very closely with our Ukrainian, and I should say also our Moldovan friends, where a similar recommendation is made. And we know that they can actually complete those reforms by then, if there is political will. What are the missing reforms? So there are two reforms that are needed for the fight against corruption. One relates to completing adopting a law that has been registered already in their parliament that would increase the capacity of their anti-corruption investigative services called NABU, where they have to raise the number of staff up to 1,000 so that they have a more effective and bigger capacity. Secondly, they would need to change some provisions of their asset declaration rules, which would effectively make the asset declaration system more effective in respect of possible past mistakes and or with regards to private sector workers crossing into the public sector. So you see that we are very demanding when it comes to these reforms. I have to say that the Ukrainians are a little bit angry with us that we are insisting so much, because the IMF has signed off on this already. We, however, are setting the bar very high, because the ambition that we have and the momentous task of integrating Ukraine requires the highest standards. So that is why we have this second reform. Third reform relates to a law on lobbying, which is part of their action program dealing with de-oligarchization. And the fourth set of reforms relates to minorities, where they've done a lot, but you are no doubt familiar with the work of the Venice Commission, which has recommended that minority rights, especially when it comes to education, but not only, are adequately protected. Very delicate issue that actually occurs in many of our candidate countries, where there are significant minorities. In Ukraine, mostly Hungarian, Romanian, and Bulgarian, and of course Russian. And here the issue is to find a balance between their rights and the need of the state to be able to function, and for these minorities also to be able to function in Ukraine and in Ukrainian. So the balance, I cannot go into too much detail here, but the balance is very, very important. They're not there yet. And we think that that has to be done as well. And all these reforms, which go very far, as you can imagine, are needed for us to actually only start the accession process. So I want to explain to you that we are not lowering the standards whatsoever. We're not giving them any discount for the horrible situation they are in. I can tell you, I've never negotiated with a partner where from time to time we have to go into a bunker or a shelter because there is a bomb alarm. But that is not changing our approach. It cannot change our approach. Because actually, in a way, if we change our approach, we would be lowering our standards and we would be weakening the union. And that is clearly not what we want to do. Thank you.
I'll get back to that with regards to the merit-based approach, which you have now highlighted several times, and which is also a very clear message in the written communication by the Commission. But I was just wondering whether you could say a little bit more about what happens now, I mean, with regards to both Ukraine, Moldova, and then Bosnia-Herzegovina. Because all three countries, I mean, you say you recommend that one could open negotiations, but with regards to the two first one, Ukraine and Moldova, well, there are these sort of extra, well, they have this to-do list, to use your term, that they have to finish before then the actual negotiations can start, right? But then you have Bosnia-Herzegovina, where you use sort of kind of a different kind of language, where you say, yes, we are ready to open negotiations, but apparently they are not entering the negotiation room at the same time, or could you just clarify that?
Absolutely. Well, there's a difference between the first two, Ukraine and Moldova on the one hand, and Bosnia-Herzegovina on the other hand, for the simple reason that the first two have made many more reforms, and we're really looking at the missing elements from the to-do list, which is a very small percentage. Bosnia has made a number of reforms since they were granted candidate status last year. That's very encouraging. It's a very difficult, complex situation with one of the entities, the Republika Srpska, actually backsliding. But nevertheless, a federal government was formed. A number of reforms were undertaken. But to be honest, they are nowhere near the state of advancement of Ukraine and Moldova. And therefore, the language in the report is different. What we say is that we recommend that they be granted, so that accession negotiations should start once the necessary accession conditions are met, and they're not met yet. But we do feel that we want to encourage them, as the president said. We're opening the door, but they have to work for it, because also for them the merit-based approach stands. Thanks.
And the actual then decisions that will be made now would then be what? I mean, if one looks upon the timeline, you have now the heads of state, government meeting in December, 13th and 14th of December, as far as I remember. And there you have the decision whether to say, yes, we follow the recommendation by the Commission, we open negotiations, right? And then what then? I mean, then you start preparing that negotiation framework, or do you wait to see whether they finalize the due list? I mean, what happens then afterwards?
Yeah. So what is very important to realize is that the proposal for Ukraine and Moldova is unconditional on opening. So we start immediately with the work. What will happen on the 15th, when the European Council is over, is that I will send teams to Chisinau and to Kyiv to start the screening process and the preparation of the negotiating framework, notably the discussions on the roadmaps. That work starts immediately. And it won't just start immediately, it will actually be expedited. Because we're not going to be following the very slow process that we have seen in the Western Balkans. We want to do the screening a lot faster. And we want to have the work on the negotiating framework also done as fast as possible, so that come March, by which time they hopefully will have completed the outstanding elements in their to-do list, there actually is a negotiating framework that can be adopted by the Council, because as you know, it needs to be proposed by the Commission. And that we also, by that stage, would already have advanced a lot on the screening process. So in reality, our proposal is very clear. There is an unconditional opening proposed for these two countries. The work would start immediately. There is a staging post for the negotiating framework. That's just to double check that the reforms are being completed. And then hopefully the negotiating framework would be adopted, and we could then move forward. So that is the logic that we are following. Again, we're combining the merit-based approach, not giving any discounts on substance, with an accelerated timeline.
That was very helpful. And when you say keep on stressing the merit-based approach, I mean, one obviously gets slightly worried when you say it that many times. One says, is it because you're actually worried that due to political reasons it will be difficult to maintain this merit-based approach? I mean, after all, this is also, as you highlight, geopolitical process. There'll be lots of pressure, I presume, at a certain stage then to finish this enlargement process, also in order to maintain sort of the commitment by the candidate countries possibly, or if something, knock on wood, would happen in Russia. I mean, why do you continue stressing, that it is a merit-based approach?
No, I'm stressing that because the geopolitical context, of course, is critically important. And I know there are concerns in some member states that somehow this would go at the expense of the merit-based approach and that we would be watering down the conditions. But as I've tried to explain and illustrate, we're actually not doing that. On the contrary, we think the two have to go hand in hand. Thank you.
And I guess that also goes for the overall ambition that the EU is able to function after enlargement. If one goes back to Grenada, the European Council, the heads of state and government meeting there, there was a decision that, yes, we are now moving ahead with enlargement, but it should be done in parallel with reform. I guess that's also going to be very important to follow that double track process.
Yes, that is important, but it's a different process. It's not the enlargement process. We have clearly signaled that we want to be ready for when they are ready to join. I think that is an important signal that we mean business. Clearly going from 27 to potentially 38 is a huge change. But I also would like to caution against over-dramatizing the change. Actually, in terms of number of citizens who would be joining the EU, this is a smaller enlargement than the 2004 enlargement. In terms of the size of the economies, we would be adding smaller enlargement. I also think there's a lot of speculation about the budgetary costs of the enlargement, which unfortunately, these analyses are often based on comparative static analyses where one looks at the existing policies, and we know policies are dynamic, they evolve. So it is important to get prepared. We have announced, the President of the Commission has announced that we will review our policies. But I want to avoid a situation where this is seen as an additional condition in the accession process. It's a parallel requirement that we are following, but one where I think I at least have a lot of confidence that we can address these issues, given the scale of the challenge that we're facing.
Yeah, and I guess one can also say it is, though, about part of the Copenhagen criteria. I mean, the so-called absorption capacity. I guess you also have to be a little of an enlargement nerd to remember that strange term, absorption capacity. It doesn't really sound that nice when you are speaking to people not following the enlargement process. Just because we want to let you go on time, bit more speculative question. Where do you see the main obstacles now going ahead in the enlargement process? Could it be public support in the present member states? Could it be rule of law? Could it be that we have so many other items on our agenda that will not really have the sufficient energy to focus upon enlargement? Or where do you see obstacles?
Well, I don't underestimate the challenge at all. This is a momentous task. The words used by our president are reflective of this, and the call of history means that we're dealing with something that is very big. So yes, there are risks, challenges that we need to face. I think what is necessary is for two things to happen. The reform momentum in the countries needs to be upheld in the East and improved in the Western Balkans. That can only be done in the countries themselves. We can help them, we can invest in them, we can incentivize them, as I've explained, but ultimately these are choices of sovereign countries that they and only they can make. It's difficult, it's hard to reform your country. Enlargement means rewriting the operating system of your economy and society to a very large extent. Now, in the East, it's nearly an existential question for the three. In the Western Balkans, there is a lot of cynicism, but the incentive that we now give and if you will, the references to the East will hopefully sustain this momentum and trigger it even further. So one point is keeping up the reforms in the countries. I think the second area that I think is important is really ourselves and our public perception of enlargement. Citizens in the EU are ambivalent, I think, in many countries about enlargement. People are worried. We all remember the discussions surrounding the big enlargement of the early 2000s. And I think we need to be honest and straight, both about the challenges, and yes, there will be challenges, but also about the advantages. And especially in rich countries like Denmark and the Netherlands, we have unfortunately not been talking about the advantages enough. Because enlargement is not a zero-sum game, it's a positive-sum game, also for the old member states. And I think we need to have that debate with the public opinion everywhere. If we don't do that, and we talk about 9 countries joining the EU potentially costing us money, if through the budget, if that is the perception of our citizens, then it's going to be hard for the body politic in our member states to sustain it. But we need to present it for what it is. It's much more. There are huge advantages in terms of security, but also in terms of economy and in terms of sustaining the way we live in Europe. So there's a big challenge also in our own countries in terms of the responsibility of leaders to tell the story in its full width and breadth.
Well, thank you very much. That's what you just did. I mean, presenting your case, but particularly also the enlargement package to a Danish audience. We truly appreciate that. We hope to see you here in Copenhagen, obviously, in a very short period, I guess, once the enlargement negotiations will truly sort of start. And then we will not sing Eric Clapton, but we will be singing Rod Stewart. but I'll tell you why when you get here. So thank you very much for coming, and all the best. And then we move on, and I will obviously explain this about Rod Stewart, but if I can have my two favorite ambassadors, for other ambassadors in the room. So why Rod Stewart? I'm sailing, right? Because I have with me here Sailing on High Seas, Reforming and Enlarging the EU for the 21st Century. Paris, Berlin, it says here, 18th of September 2023. And this is a report which was prepared after sort of a request by the German and the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, looking into how can we actually then prepare for enlargement. As I quoted the other day when I was in Berlin, I found this saying also in the maritime sector: the pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, the realist adjusts its sails. So this is what we're supposed to do here, adjusting the sails. Ambassador Christophe Parisot and Ambassador Pascal Hector, obviously France, Germany. And I'm sure you'll now tell me that this is not the official point of view from the French and the German government, just like our friend from the Commission saying this is a complete merit-based approach, so there's nothing else than a merit-based approach. Well, we figured that out by now, that it is not a Franco-German official paper. But there must be something in it where your ministers said, mein Gott, mon Dieu, this is really good. There may also be something which you thought, oh, maybe that's not so good. So maybe we should just have a round on that. How has the report been perceived would be the more diplomatic, correct way of phrasing it.
Well, just you.
Yeah. Bitte sehr, Herr Botschafter.
Yes, of course, we'll reply to that question, but before coming there, I would like to make a preliminary remark, and that is that why it is so important to have this enlargement, and why the fact that we get this enlargement soon and that we get it right is of so paramount importance. It's exactly like it was explained by the Commission, because the geopolitical situation has changed completely, and we have now an imperialist country, Russia, that wants to get back its former colonies in a way. You have to express it in these terms to make it really clear what it is about. And we cannot allow ourselves to have gray zones anymore in Europe. We cannot have gray zones in the Balkans, and we cannot have gray zones in Eastern Europe, Ukraine and Moldova, and in perspective Georgia. So we need to get it soon and to get it right. And to get it right means to have the European, at the end, after it is completed, a European Union that is still functioning and that is well functioning, and that is not falling apart or not able to to make decisions anymore. And that's why we need to have these two processes in parallel to make the European Union ready for it as well. And so that's why we, Germany and France and Germany, tasked some high-rise thinkers to reflect on what could be done. So this is a proposal on their own, which is not endorsed by the government, and each of our government has several things which we do not really agree with, but it is a very good way of bringing the thinking forward. And of course, the main issue is to get the European Union ready to act at 36 countries. And to get there, well, the first thing you have to do is to facilitate decision-making processes. So everything that goes in the direction of more qualified majority is in principle very welcome. On the details, you have to see what it is, but that's the one thing. If qualified majority is...
We're not that much in favor of
moving
to qualified majority.
Raises
switching up the light,
some doubts or some fears, then what you can do is to reflect on, are there are there emergency mechanisms that you can put around it? We have these, for instance, in the CFSP. In the CFSP, we have already now some elements of qualified majority, very, very few, but still they exist, and they can be more. But you have always the emergency brake that the member states can refer the issue to the European Council, where then there is consensus. I mean, you could reflect on such things. We'll not do it here, but it's just to say. And secondly, we have also to have institutions that are capable of working, meaning you have to reflect about the size of the Commission, things which, by the way, do not require treaty change, because the size of the Commission is fixed by a decision. So there are many, many useful things in it that we can reflect on. And perhaps
but in principle, what you say is that what's most important for this report, I mean, is that you need to accept the very fact that we also have to have institutional reform in order for enlargement to go ahead.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
so it's not the details that's important. It's the point that has to take place in parallel, enlargement and institutional reform. What's been the reaction in France?
First, actually,
and welcome.
Yeah, merci. Actually, we didn't say "mon Dieu" because actually we're a secular and laic state.
We are not.
Yeah.
So what did you say then?
Well,
yeah, exactly. That's what I thought.
Yeah, well, that's a more French name, French word that some general used in some. It was also coming from Brussels, not far away. No. I think we exactly at the same thing, and I won't repeat what Pascal said about like non-endorsement, but the fact that it does exist,
exactly.
Because actually it's just like at least setting the right framework for discussions, and there are actually very positive things into it. Of course, we do have, and France has certainly changed its position on this is a strategic necessity actually to have enlargement. This is a geopolitical change, and we totally agree on this. And I think we are taking it from a different angle, which is like what for? I mean, if you want to enlarge for enlarging, so be it. But if you want to enlarge because actually this is a necessity and it will bring actually something to the EU with the conditions that, as Pascal said, we need to have something that is functioning with more member states. And we need actually to be able, in a more dangerous world, actually to answer to crises, some stakes and things like this. So that's actually the aim. And it's more like the enlargement is a mean to get to this objective. So it's a different way of looking at things. And of course, I mean, the fact that enlargement and approfondissement, as we say, deepening, for those that have this in mind, like a little bit capacité d'absorption, which is a nice word. It looks like when I'm going out for a bar, my absorption capacity depends actually. Okay. But no, the fact is just like there are two parallel things, and we want to be able to do enlargement without approfondissement or deepening, and it implies actually certainly institutional change or actually reforms. I wouldn't actually go to this way, and what is important in this report was that you have a good analysis of the great questions. What is at stake? What do we need to look at? And I think that was the first things. And then actually it was a good things because they were proposing options. Yeah. And then from this point of view, we just like it. The good things because there won't be a ready made decision and or options or solutions, and we will need actually to talk about it. So that was actually the good things. And of course, I mean, from this point of view, we really look at policies, just like decision-making processes, policies in which kind of domains we will need to change things in order still to be efficient, swift decision-making process, and just to be able to answer some crises. So from this point of view, I think it was actually something that was very positive. Then actually when we get into more details, I mean, being frank, there's something that we said, my God, and the other one we say merde. But some will say, not bad, which is much more Danish way of saying things. But I would say there's more options. There are some options that are quite interesting. And I would say just like participation, the participative democracy. I think from this point of view, we just like, that makes sense, and this is something that we have actually suddenly forgotten. And I think from this point of view regarding enlargement and the proposal, there are some stuff that are interesting regarding for, this gradual integration for candidate countries. And that actually part of it is actually to have them participating more to the institutional and the democratic life of the EU before being a full member. And that's actually looks symbolic, but it's you're already part of the family dinner before actually just like paying the bill. But that's one thing. We also, for example, this is an interesting thing, using actually a mathematical formula for the number of seats in the European Parliament.
Yeah.
Instead of having these never-ending discussions about how many things, just make it and not coming back to it. I think actions vis-à-vis crisis answer, crisis response. I think this is very good things on the options that they are just proposing, because there are going to be more and more crises. So we have to just answer. I came back to the gradual integration actually of candidate countries, and we need to have a more coherent approach with this one. We need to make it real for a good fun, and my colleagues is somewhere, Marine is over there, the new number 2 of the French embassy, and we had a good fun because actually this new methodology, that everyone is talking about, that is dated from 2020, was actually made in our office. Or proposed at least. We were thinking about this one, and we need to make it more concrete. We need to make it more in a coherent way and not in silos and different tracks. We have to get a better pilotage politique, as we say in French, on this one, and it's merit-based for sure. It has to be conditional and it has to be reversible. Because it's make it current. So that's actually, let's say, the 3 things that we look like very interesting into the report. And then actually, of course, we had some strong this is what we call, they were free, they were independent, and you can see on the outcome because we don't have everything we wanted. But I think we are a little bit, let's say, réticent, it's what we say in French, worried about the short-term generalization of qualified majority in everything. That's a little bit I think it's a little bit like going too far if it's short term and generalized.
So basically what the report sort of suggests is that one could basically move to qualified majority on all issues.
Exactly.
I mean, not just where you have, now it's getting from it's the passerelle where you can move to a qualified majority.
That's the thing which is a little bit reticent. I think differentiated formats.
Yeah.
I mean, this kind of no cherry picking on policies. It's just
Rosinenpickerei, as they say in German. What do you actually say in French?
À la carte.
À la carte. Okay.
Just.
Okay.
I don't know why.
We'll find out.
Au restaurant, c'est bien. Yes, I know, but we are not in a restaurant. And the fact is just and this kind of multi-speed kind of intégration à plusieurs vitesses, this is kind of dangerous. We just we can have coopération renforcée or reinforced cooperation and things like this. But this à la carte and different speeds is actually something that we are very much skeptic about it. And the last one is just this is good fun, the election of the president of the European Commissions with interinstitutional agreement. This is something we say no way.
Okay, so no Spitzenkandidat.
It's whatever, you can try actually again the Spitzencandidate for the next one.
I mean, not me personally, I hope.
Right, I can understand this. But it's already planned in the treaty that European Parliament has to pronounce by majority on the name of the proposed candidate by the council. So it already exists. There's no, it's kind of let's say institutional, artificial. So if we look into details, that are actually, positive and negative things.
But I guess that's the whole point with a report like this, that there are issues here, suggestions that you think are completely ridiculous, but they're not very likely, and then there are things that, well, this is actually something that is worthwhile, but the important thing is that it's a systematic sort of way of looking upon the overall challenge. I know that German ambassador has to leave, and anyway, also moving very quickly into the next panel, but you can answer this, and then maybe you can elaborate. When you talk to a number of countries, they seem to say that, well, this is fine, right? Okay, all these reform suggestions, but isn't that actually a way for Germany and France, and maybe also some other countries, for saying, well, we don't really want enlargement anyway. So we are now talking so much about institutional change to be Spielverderber. What is Spielverderber in French? You know that. So
Yeah, okay. Oui, tourner autour de la table, tourner en rond, something like this.
probably, yeah, I'm not sure. Anyway, but what's your response to that?
Well, that's
because it is really an argument that you hear very often.
Yeah. Well, that's a clear no to that.
Yeah. But how?
To that postant.
Yeah.
No, I mean that's for sure not the case, and it's not the case because our interest is in the first place enlargement. I mean, we want the enlargement because we need it. We need it for the reasons I said before, that we have to avoid gray zones in Europe, especially in the present geopolitical situation. So it's not at all that we want to hinder enlargement. Well, on the contrary, we want to speed it up. But to speed it up, we also need the famous absorption capacity that was spoken on. So we cannot distinguish the one from the other. But of course, we have to find a way that is compatible, that is acceptable to all member states. That's obvious. It's always like this in the deepening negotiations, because at the end, we have to have an agreement by everyone. By the way, independently of whether you do a treaty change or whether you do the passerelles and so on, because these instruments of flexible integration usually also need the acceptance by all member states. So there's no way of doing a change that only concerns a limited number of member states, except for doing a special treaty on a new subject, what we did, for instance, on Schengen, or what we did on the euro, especially the Schengen in the beginning.
We're just trying to translate Spielverderber.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's...
Party breaker.
Okay, but that was a very
Yeah.
clear answer. And let's give the German ambassador a big hand.
Thank you very much.
I promised you could leave up. No, you're staying.
I know, I cannot expect.
Because I have to distribute the prize for the German-Danish Unternehmen, the most
Company,
innovative
yeah.
company. So
Yeah, so
unfortunately
who
I have
wins?
to go. Well, that will.
Okay,
I'm not
well.
allowed to say yet, but you'll hear it in half an hour.
Okay. We'll check your X account.
À tout à l'heure,
So-
Pascal. Yeah, now I
Yeah.
really need
Now
to answer,
you're on your own, right? So that's it.
Yeah,
But
no,
why do you actually
the
think that there
translation,
is
the
this
translation
debate?
trouble
Yeah.
fête,
Yeah.
party breaker,
Yeah.
which I like, but I prefer the expression in French is that noyer le poisson, to try to drown the fish, which is a bad translation. No,
To
I mean,
drown the
yes, noyer le poisson, you find something and it's so complex that it will never happen.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
no, I mean,
Yeah.
from this point of view, this is actually truly exactly what just Pascal said. There is no way that we try to circumvent the things, make it so complex that it's one way of just like not making it. I think there's a true belief in France that we need to do this enlargement, but we need to do it right. There's actually that the things, and there's no precondition in sense, and it was actually what Ursula von der Leyen said in her State of the Union speech. It's actually the reform of the European Union is not a precondition for enlargement. I mean, this is something to do, but this is a very intellectual way of saying things. In reality, we know that if we just stay the way we are, it won't work. So of course we will need actually to be capable of actually having 6, 7, whatever, more member states. De facto, we will need actually to do this certainly beforehand or at the same time, because otherwise it won't work. And it won't work not only in terms of institutional, it won't work in terms of policies. I mean, if you have, cohesion policy the way it is now, that's going to be difficult. If we have the common agricultural policy the way it is, I mean, come on, look what is happening actually with the unilateral decision that we made actually on access to market by Ukraine, grains and things.
Yeah.
It creates a huge mess in some countries. So all this, we know that we need to be prepared. And that from this point of view, I mean, there's no way actually just like all these things that we need to do, it's a preconditions. But we have to be very frank. We will need actually to do something at least. So it's not a preconditions, but de facto, we will need to do something. But it's just like, before there were some cases where we had enlargement without reforms, and we had reforms without enlargement.
Mm-hmm.
So it's technically true that, but here for sure, these two are very much interlinked, well, because we cannot afford them.
But
otherwise.
I guess it says something about the level of trust, that there is this sort of suspicion that maybe that all this discussion about institutional reform is just because, well, some countries don't really want to have enlargement. I think that at least for me it's been striking how often that argument has been raised, but you don't have to comment on that.
But the fact is, like, I think there's a consensus among member states, and I'm coming actually from member states who certainly in the past were one of the most reluctant one, because I think from an intellectual point of view, there was this belief, and I was exactly discussing this with my colleague, that we had, without really saying it, that maybe enlargement will actually hamper our capacity. It will actually diminish our sovereignty and power. European one, not French one, but European one. And I think we were just at ease with this, and we changed. We really believe that basically just like this is a positive things, but it's only a positive things like it if we do it right. If can only have a positive outcome on our sovereignty and on our capacity to answer crises, to be in this much more dangerous world, if we do it right. So we come back to this, and I do believe that I worked for a minister who would say there's about suspicion and trust. I mean, there's nothing existing like love, only proof of love. But it's the same thing with trust. It's just like a lot of people and a lot of countries can say, oh, we are much more in favor of enlargement. But then actually when you move actually to concrete things, what is happening? How much is going to cost you? Are you ready actually to accept that maybe less of your region is going to benefit for cohesion policies? I mean, all these kind of things are just like real stuff. And I think we are much more interested in getting into this debate, getting into just like try to find the right solution to this stakes, rather than actually just only remaining at a pure intellectual, theoretical point of view.
And when you say, that France has now sort of changed its position with regards to
look at the
could you just,
GlobSec.
What happened? Obviously I know that, the 24th of February 2022 happened, but this must also have been a debate, I presume, in the Élysée.
True.
And can one, now I'm being very frank again, but you know me,
I know you.
Can we then be certain that change is here to stay?
I love this. Well, I will just also be very frank.
Yeah.
This is for sure that we have a president who is kind of a game changer too in terms of this. True believer in European Union, a true European, and it definitely changed. And definitely helped to change this view. And there were a huge discussion in the Élysée, regarding this. But if you look at the different speech he made, not only the GlobSec one in Bratislava, which was clear, it was kind of a summary of what he did already said, and it changed. And of course, 24th of February. But so I think it's a more structural change into the French position. And I doubt basically that you might have a new president, there will be a new president in some years because you cannot have a third term. But I don't think that there is a big risk regarding this kind of change. It's a little bit like, let's say, climate change and renewables and those kind of things. For a long time, people say, well, French, say something one day and the next day you wake up and you say, maybe we changed. No, I think it's much more structural in this one way. What happened is just like, I think, we saw things in a more geopolitical way. Really, the things, and as Pascal said, we are living in a different world where we don't need actually to have gray zone. That's what changed.
And before we move on to the next panel, what's then the French sort of hope for the European Council then, the one coming up on the 23rd,
hopes for a European Council looks like an oxymoron.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, hope objective, let's say. I think what we do expect is just like three different things.
Yeah.
The first one is just like on the proposal of the commissions regarding opening the discussions, opening. I think we are in favor of it. We hope that
So
we will,
opening accession negotiations with the countries.
with
that
all
were
the
mentioned,
different conditions, preconditions, very big technicalities. But at the end of the day, I think we are still in this putting for it, at least on the two countries mentioned, Ukraine and Moldova. The others is like slightly a little bit more complex. We're still actually evaluating
That's also what we
things.
heard, yeah.
But
Bosnia-Herzegovina,
that's the things. I think the confirmation of this wish to have the gradual integration as a mean to just anchor Western Balkan countries mainly, but others to the European Union. I think that's actually something what we are expecting, and I think also the commitment in terms of financial support of that is like committing into these countries to just like be something that is settled and that we know we're going to do it. So I think like that's what we hope.
And
like the plan of the commissions.
And what about reform? I mean, I guess there's also going to be a section on that saying that in parallel with enlargement we should
I think
look into
the
this.
acknowledgement that actually the two are linked.
Yeah.
As we say, just like one is not going without the others.
Yeah.
And be it not calling it condition, but the reality just like both are the two sides of the same coin. And I think this acknowledgement, but it's kind of consensual, I think so. I hope so.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see what actually happens, but there are also some debate, as you know, about whether one should already now discuss target date. I mean, not a target date when you say that 2030 the candidate countries should join the European Union, but maybe an idea to say, okay, if we say to the candidate countries by 2030, we, the European Union, promise to be ready, then we will have done our chores, our Hausaufgaben. I think that could maybe then
homework,
also increase sort of the,
I
remove some of the uncertainty among some of the candidate countries.
We have to see setting a date as, is it useful or not?
That's why I asked.
I mean, the question, I think it's a very ambivalent tool. It put pressure, it gives kind of a perspective, but setting a date means like at one point you will have disappointment on one side because it's too late, and for the other side will be like too early. So I think it's a very difficult tool to use it, and it's always shooting in your foot by setting a date because you're pretty sure that you're going to miss it.
We're going to miss the date. Thank you very much also for your great sort of semantic contribution to the debate. We will remember that, definitely. Thank you so much for coming. Og nu skifter vi sprog. Nu går vi til vores danske panel om, hvordan ser man i forskellige organisationer på udvidelsesprocessen, der er ved at blive mic'et op, som det jo hedder på moderne dansk. Og ligesom overgang til noget af det, vi hørte, så er der jo ingen tvivl om, at når man begynder at se på det her lidt mere i detaljen, så kan man jo se, at så begynder interesserne jo så også at blive klare. Jeg minder bare om, at der i øjeblikket ved den polsk-ukrainske grænse er polske lastbilchauffører, der blokerer for, at ukrainere kan komme over, fordi man jo synes, at det underminerer konkurrenceevnen. Og nu ser jeg lige, hvordan jeg kan få ro i salen. Der er lige nogen, der lidt er på vej ud, så I hælder lige noget vand op, det har jeg gjort. Vi siger skål til en anden, skål, så er vi klar, og så er vi ved at have koncentration på plads. Godt, tusind tak. Det vi jo skal prøve på nu, det er at komme spadestikket dybere. Fordi vi har jo sådan set forstået nu, går ud fra, hvorfor mange synes, at udvidelsen er en god idé. Men vi har jo så også haft lidt mindre debat om, kan man så sige, hvad skal der så rent faktisk til og hvad er vi også villige til at acceptere af forandringer, for at det rent faktisk kan finde sted. For selvfølgelig kan man ikke udvide med så mange lande, uanset at vi jo så hørte, at så dyrt behøver det ikke at blive osv., uden at det kræver forandringer. Så, Signe Kunan fra Finans Danmark, Johan Moskov Andersen, Dansk Metal, Niels Lindberg Madsen, Landbrug og Fødevare. Så skal vi ikke starte med, hvad er egentlig på spil for jeres stol? Altså, nu taler vi om jeres, hvor I er jeres sektor. Ikke Danmark, og ikke, vi skal ikke have nogen gråzoner osv. Det går ud fra, at vi sådan set mange af os er enige i. Men hvad er der på spil lige specifikt for jeres område, hvor I er? Signe, du må starte.
Jamen altså for os er det jo selvfølgelig, kan man sige, den økonomi, der er afledt af den sikkerhedspolitiske situation, vi har. Og udvidelsen hænger jo sammen med sikkerhedspolitik. Det er ikke fordi, vi er vågnet op, og nu var det så opportun. Det er fordi, vi skal. Det regner ind. Vi er nødt til at lægge noget tag på. Og vi har jo set omkostningerne for europæere og også for vores sektor i forbindelse med inflationen, rentestigninger. Dem er vi så mere glade for end kunderne. Men altså, der er jo ikke nogen tvivl om, at alle sektorer, også vores sektorer, kan jo mærke, når Europa er ustabilt. Og vi har brug for at have den her diskussion nu, få tag på. Det bliver ikke let. Det tror jeg ikke, der er nogen af os, der forestiller os, at det bliver, men det er nødvendigt. Så jeg synes, der er sådan helt fundamentalt sikkerhed, også økonomisk sikkerhed på spil.
Hvad siger du, Johan?
Jamen, jeg tænker jo egentlig, at Gert Jan Koopman til at starte med sagde det meget godt. På det første minut fik han jo indkapslet, at det handler først og fremmest om sikkerhed. Det handler dernæst om regeloverholdelse, og så økonomi som nummer 3. Så når jeg nu på vegne af mine medlemmer i Dansk Metal er interesseret i, at vi samarbejder og samhandler med vores omverden, så er det jo en økonomisk betragtning, men det ligger jo altså underordnet. Det, synes jeg, den store geopolitiske, sikkerhedspolitiske situation, vi står i. Udenrigsministeren sagde det sådan set rigtig godt på den Europakonference, som I lige har afholdt, at hvis ikke Europa står klar til at åbne nogle døre, ja, så er der jo nogle andre, der står klar til at åbne nogle døre. Og det er jo først og fremmest et sikkerhedspolitisk spørgsmål. På den økonomiske side af sagen kan man sige, at de medlemmer, vi har i Dansk Metal, uanset om det er industriteknikere, smede eller svejsere, ja, så går de jo rundt på virksomheden i Produktionsdanmark. Og der er jo ikke nogen af deres arbejdspladser, der er blevet rige på, at Danmark eller Europa har lukket som sig selv. Tværtimod har vi set, når vi kigger historisk på det, at der har været nogle fordele for Europa ved både at samarbejde og samhandle. Så det er sådan først og fremmest vores vinkel ind på det, men det er klart, det er sikkerhedspolitikken, der er det vigtige i det.
Så bekymringen mærker du ikke meget af, eller hvad på nuværende tidspunkt?
Nej, men altså, det er klart, at det er jo en transformation, tror jeg, du startede med at sige, og enhver transformation indebærer jo risici og muligheder, og der er det jo Europas rolle at afbalancere de både muligheder og risici, som der er. Det tænker jeg også, vi kan komme tilbage til det.
Det gør vi. Og hvad siger landbruget?
Hvad siger landbruget? Vi siger jo lidt det samme. Altså, at det er jo sikkerhedspolitik, som er den helt overordnede gevinst ved det her. Og så ser vi jo også lidt, som vi har hørt, altså en vækst i nogle lande. Ukraine, som jo slet ikke har fulgt Polen i den udvikling, de har haft, så et potentielt marked og afsætning af vores produkter. Men vi ser jo også en konkurrence. Altså man skal bare kigge til Polen. Altså nu har du snakket om nogle lastbilchauffører. Der har jo været nogle landmænd dernede, som har været på barrikaderne i lang tid, fordi der er korn, der har bevæget sig ind over grænsen der. Og det er jo bare det første eksempel på rigtig mange andre produkter, som kan følge efter. Så på den måde kan det blive hårdt. Og i sidste ende, så er det jo selvfølgelig en landbrugspolitik, som er i spil. Hvordan bliver den påvirket af det her?
Og hvad siger så baglandet til det, når man ser på udvidelsen helt overordnet? Man kunne jo også godt have den bekymring, at med mindre kagen bliver voldsomt meget større, hvilket når ikke gør, så skal vi alle sammen have et mindre stykke af den kage. Så det kan jo også godt gå ind og påvirke landbruget negativt, eller hvad?
Jamen, der er risiko og mulighed i det her, men altså grundlæggende, så tænker vi, at det her det er et instrument til at sikre et større EU med en økonomisk vækst på nogle markeder, som vi ikke har nogen afsætning til i dag. Så det er muligheder. Men altså, kom tilbage om 5 år, eller 10 år, eller hvornår det nu er sket, så er der... Så har vi været igennem nogle faser, hvor der har været nogle alvorlige kriser på forskellige produkter, fordi hvad er det, de skal hvad er det for nogle vilkår, de producerer under? Hvad skal de leve op til? Og der kommer det jo til at betyde rigtig meget, hvad er det for nogle forhandlinger, man får? Hvor hurtigt skal de leve op til de samme dokumentationskrav, fødevaresikkerhedskrav, alt muligt. Og så har vi, og det er måske ikke så meget Danmark, men vi har jo i EU som helhed en kæmpe udfordring i forhold til at sikre en land-by-balance. Altså fordi det her jo meget hurtigt bliver på landbrugsområdet, hvor ikke bare potentielt danske landmænd, men jo især mange andre landmænd i de andre lande, der bliver presset. Så derfor kan det blive hårdt for EU, nuværende EU. Hvordan sikrer vi den der balance, så der stadigvæk er et levedygtigt landbrug i det nordlige Finland, eller de der rigtig, rigtig mange rumænske små landbrug osv.
Ja, og det var det, men det lykkedes mig jo ikke helt med den franske ambassadør. Nu prøver jeg lidt med jer. Altså, når udvidelsen, når der er så mange hurdler på vejen, der er så mange interesser, så kunne jeg altså virkelig godt tænke mig, at man på en eller anden måde alligevel gjorde kandidatlandene klar, hvornår det her på en eller anden måde kan være slut, og hvornår det der tag er blevet fikset. Altså, ellers må man vel risikere, at de står og de reformerer, men hvor lang tid kan man opretholde det store engagement, man for eksempel også har haft nede i kælderen i Ukraine, hvis der pludselig går adskillige år, før man overhovedet begynder sådan for alvor at komme videre med de forhandlinger?
Jamen, jeg tror, der er den afvejning mellem tid og merit, som det så smukt hedder, altså betingelserne i Bruxelles.
The merit-based approach.
Ja, men som man jo slet ikke er parat til.
Kan du sige det der med
Nej, det tror jeg. Og det tror jeg slet ikke, jeg skal begynde på. Jeg tror, det der er vigtigt, altså, de vil jo ikke melde den dato ud nu, fordi det er der jo så nogle andre, der vil benytte sig af. Men på et eller andet tidspunkt giver det jo sig selv, at det må have en ende. Og lige nu er det vigtigt, og det er jo også derfor, de har lavet en rækkefølge, hvor der er nogen i køen foran de andre. Så et kvalificeret gæt, det kommer nok til at gå relativt hurtigere med Ukraine og Moldova end de andre. Altså, og derfor
Montenegro kunne vel godt.
Ja. Jo. Ja. Men altså, det er jo... Altså, så hvordan skulle man sætte de der datoer? Det vil jo komme, men nu er der jo nødt til at gå en proces i gang, og den bliver mega svær. Altså, der bliver masser af hurdler, men fordi den overordnede udfordring, vi forsøger at løse med en udvidelse, er større, så er det jo det, der skal drive værket, mere end et timingspørgsmål.
Men hvis timingen så er den, at man sådan set ikke siger til Ukraine, vi lover dig, du vil komme ind i 2030, men man siger til kandidatlandene, vi vil have gennemført alle de reformer, som er nødvendige for, at I kan komme ind inden en bestemt dato. Danske EU-formandskab, eller hvad ved jeg. Hvornår skal vi have gennemført de der reformer? Landbrugspolitikken, EU's institutioner. For hvis det bare er sådan, at vi siger, jo, det må vi jo så gøre for tid til, så kommer det jo ikke til at ske. Så det der med på en eller anden måde også, at vi sætter os selv lidt under pres, synes jeg egentlig personligt er en meget god idé, som også er med i den her rapport. Fordi jeg kan ikke se der med, at man så siger, så, det sagde udenrigsministeren også på vores konference, da jeg spurgte om det med en form for dato, så siger han, jamen det skal være meritbaseret. Ja, det skal være meritbaseret, men derfor kan vi andre vel da godt committe os selv på, at inden bestemt dato, eller inden den nye kommission måtte træde til, finde på et eller andet, at man der er villig til så at sige, der er vi klar. Er det helt på månen?
Altså, jeg tror, det bliver svært her i panelet at finde en præcis dato.
Ja, du har ikke nogen dato. Det var mere, om man skulle på en eller anden måde sige, okay, I skal gøre et hav, kære kandidatland. Og der har man jo skrevet det hele ned med de her 35 kapitler og så videre, og det var Københavnerkriterierne. Men det er jo aldrig blevet defineret, hvad den der absorptionskapacitet er. Altså hånden på hjertet, der var nogen, der sad ude i Bellacenteret i København 1993 og skrev noget, og så kom de til, når EU skal jo for øvrigt også være i stand til at optage de der lande. Det er jo aldrig blevet defineret, hvad det er. Så kunne det ikke være en idé at få det præciseret? Hvad mener vi egentlig med, at vi også selv skal være klar? Meget ledende spørgsmål.
Jo, det er jo sådan et spørgsmål, man ikke rigtig skal svare nej til.
Nej, det er klogt,
men vi har jo set historisk, at der er jo forskel på, hvor hurtigt landene. Altså, jeg husker også, kroaterne var hurtigt til at komme igennem osv., så det er jo hele tiden en afvejning. Og det er heller ikke sikkert, at alle kan være lige hurtige her. Jeg tror, det er meget vigtigt. Det er der også flere, der har sagt indtil videre i dag. Det er jo også, tror jeg, det gennemgående tema, da vi diskuterede det med ledende danske og europæiske politikere på den famøse Europakonference, at det er jo vigtigt med altså menneskerettigheder, bekæmpelse af korruption osv. Det er jo noget, vi ikke for alvor kan gå på kompromis med. Særligt når vi tænker på det helt lange sigte for Europa, så tror jeg, det i hvert fald er vigtigt at holde fast ved nogle af de her ting. Ja.
Og man kan jo i hvert fald sige, hvis man bare ser på EU's kalender, så er det jo sådan, at EU's 7-årige husholdningsbudget, hvor vi også har landbrugspolitikken, den udløber jo i 2028. Så det vil sige, at man skal jo ligesom gøre den klar, det nye budget, til så man kan få sluset nogle lande ind. For ellers så udløber budgettet jo i 2034, og jeg ved ikke, nogen synes, det er særlig fedt at vente til 2034, før det kommer i den europæiske union. Så der er jo altså også nogle milepæle her for EU, som man skal være i stand til så at leve op til at forholde sig til. Nå, det var en lang forsøg på at få jer til at synes, det var en fremragende idé. Jeg må prøve med nogle andre. Jeg er alene. Jeg har noget opbakning uden for det her lokale, bare roligt. Men når man så hørte igen tilbage til Europakonferencen, som jo Tænketanken afholdt i mandag, så var det jo egentlig ret klart, at det var ikke rigtigt til at få nogen så alligevel til at bide til bolle med, hvad de så havde tænkt sig at gøre anderledes for, at den her udvidelse så kunne finde sted. Altså jeg fik at vide af Margrethe Vestager, at nej, det var meget vigtigt, at alle lande havde en kommissær. Så der skulle i hvert fald ikke ændre noget. Og så var der det der med flertalsafgørelser, kom til Lars Løkke, og vi skulle have nogle store traktatændringer osv. Jeg ved ikke, nu var jeg der, jeg ved ikke, om I kan hjælpe mig med, hvad var det egentlig, Danmark var med på, skulle være anderledes, når vi så skal være 36 lande?
Altså foreløbig har udenrigsministeren vel kun udtalt sig om kvalificeret flertal i udenrigspolitiske forhold på en eller anden måde. Det er vel så langt, som han er gået.
Som ikke er regeringspolitik?
Ja. Altså,
endnu, eller hvad?
Men det er han jo ligeglad med.
Nå, okay.
Hvad hedder det? Altså, så der vil jo blive mange diskussioner her. Altså, hvor er det, vi har behov for kvalificeret flertal? Et godt bud er, at det er der, hvor vi skal kunne træffe nogle hurtigere beslutninger. Det bliver nok ikke på skatteområdet, som jeg lige kan se det, selvom der er nogen, der kunne ønske sig det. Altså, eller arbejdsmarkedsområdet, det kunne jeg selvfølgelig godt have sagt for. Godt du sagde det. Det vil Danmark i hvert fald ikke gå med til. Altså, der er jo sådan nogle områder her, som giver mening, at man snakker kvalificeret flertal omkring, og andre ikke. Og så bliver vi selvfølgelig også nødt til at lave nogle politikområder om, som vi også har været inde på, og det er jo dem, der handler om omfordeling af midler imellem medlemslandene. Altså det er landbrugspolitik, samhørighedsfondene på dansk, tror jeg det hedder. Altså det kan jo ikke stå, som det står i dag, og slet ikke med det budget, vi har. Så altså parlamentet har jo allerede sat gang i en budgetdiskussion. De vil gerne have nogle flere egne indtægter, så budgettet kan vokse, og det er jo selvfølgelig fordi, at medlemslandene er super fedtede, ligesom de plejer at være. Og jeg kan ikke forestille mig, at vi kommer igennem den her udvidelse, uden også at se et andet EU-budget. Altså ikke bare et forholdsmæssigt større EU-budget, men et andet EU-budget. Så det er jo virkelig nogle tunge ting, vi skal hen over nu.
Så det går ikke den der med bare at sige, at så må EU bruge pengene på en bedre måde?
Nej, det gør det ikke.
Nu er jeg lige blevet familiefar, og så kan jeg jo sige,
tillykke,
at når man udvider familien, så kommer der jo et ekstra om bordet, og så er der flere synspunkter, der skal tages i kraft.
Ja, okay.
Vil jeg sige,
vi kommer fra taget til familien.
Så kommer man altså ikke langt med kun at tænke på sin egen behov, vil min hustru sige. Men samtidig så vil jeg så også sige, det bliver heller ikke nødvendigvis billigere at få en ekstra lille en. Og der tror jeg, man kan sige, at jeg har jo stor respekt for den danske position, som jo historisk har været lidt mere tilbageholdende med økonomien end så mange andre lande. Men man er jo et spareland, lige indtil man ikke er det længere. Altså hvis vi spoler tilbage til under coronakrisen, så kan jeg godt huske, at der var mange danske politikere, der sagde, ikke en krone mere. Vi var selv ude fra Metals side og sige, det kunne godt være, at man skulle bløde lidt op på den position i den sommerferie der i 2020, og pludselig så var der faktisk mange danske politikere, der godt kunne se fornuften i det, da omlægningen med de andre lande var færdig. Jeg tror, det er fuldstændig urealistisk bare at sige, at vi kan prioritere anderledes. Det kommer til at koste, lige så vel som vi ikke kunne sætte en dato på før, så kan man heller ikke sætte et præcis beløb på, men det er en uærlig diskussion, hvis man siger, at EU skal løse langt flere opgaver, vi skal have nye medlemslande, og for øvrigt så skal det ikke koste noget som helst. Det vil være lige så urealistisk, som hvis jeg sagde det til min hustru. Vi skal have et ekstra barn, det kommer ikke til at koste noget.
Ja, og det kan man sige, det var vores ven for kommissionen jo også inde på. Det er vigtigt, at man tager den debat nu, så man ikke får nogle overraskelser. Det var han jo også inde på med pludselig, at man havde debatten omkring den polske håndværker på bagkant af, at man så rent faktisk havde fået optaget de centrale og østeuropæiske lande i EU. I får mulighed for at komme med ind på banen om ikke så lang tid, tro det eller ej. Hvor langt er I egentlig med jeres sådan, gennemgang af, hvad en udvidelse kunne få af konsekvenser for landbrugssektoren? Hvor langt er man med sådan noget? Er det alt for tidligt at tænke over, eller?
Det er ikke alt for tidligt at tænke over. Jamen, der er jo nogen, der har regnet det på det allerede. Nu ved jeg, man kan jo ikke sige sådan alt andet lige her, men hvis Ukraine bliver medlem, så er det jo 25% af CAP-budgettet, som de får sådan upfront, og så falder støtten i alle nuværende lande med 20%. Det er jo sådan Det er jo der, vi står. Så
bagsiden af en serviet, eller hvad?
ja, sådan cirka. Så det er jo tydeligt for enhver, at det her får store konsekvenser, og derfor så også en diskussion af, hvordan gør vi fremadrettet. Og det siger jo sig selv, der må komme en diskussion. Kan det passe, at Ukraine, som er enormt konkurrencedygtig på rigtig mange markeder på verdensmarkedet, skal de have en arealstøtte, en hektarstøtte til alle deres højtydende jorder? Det er jo ikke sikkert, at de skal have det. Så der kommer nogle rigtig store diskussioner, der ligger foran os på det område.
Og hvornår tror du så, de går i gang? Altså...
Jamen, de går i gang nu, dybest set. Altså, og fordi det bliver en del af det, der skal... Altså, når kommissionen nu begynder at sige, hvordan skal det næste MFF se ud, hvordan skal den næste landbrugspolitik se ud, som jo bliver fremlagt sommeren 25, når Præcis. Danmark overtager formandskabet. Ikke også? Så det er der, tror jeg, at der vil det komme for en dag, men bag scenen, der er det jo den diskussion, der var kommet til at køre fra nu af.
Og så er det jo i hvert fald vigtigt, det var han jo også inde på kommissionen, at man så ikke bare tror, at det er det nuværende budget, man så forlænger brædder, og så regner ud, hvad det så kommer til at koste. Fordi så vil man jo få et regnestykke, der ser helt anderledes ud, end hvis man reformerede politikområderne as we go along. As we go along. Der var jo heller ingen, da vi udvidede med Central- og Østeuropa, i Big Bang-udvidelse der i 2002, der så fik fuld landbrugsstøtte fra dag 1. Det man gjorde tværtimod den modsatte, at man sagde 10 år, og så lavede man så loft over EU's landbrugspolitik. Nå, det var en lang gennemgang af, hvad der foregik i 2002. Er der nogen her fra salen, som vil stille mit fantastiske trojka-panel et spørgsmål? Ja, den herre herovre, der er belastet med viden. Det er andre givetvis også.
Ja. Må jeg starte med at sige, at jeg synes, at...
Sig lige, hvad du hedder.
Jeg hedder Jens Nyman, og jeg var tidligere blandt andet ansvarlig for udvidelse på fødevare og sikkerhed i Generalsekretariatet og i Sanko. Men jeg har også lavet en masse andre ting i kommissionen. Jeg starter med at sige, at jeg synes, at der var en præmisse omkring de 2 ambassadører, som er falsk. Lissabon-traktaten er udvidelsesklar. Der er intet, der i øjeblikket er kommet frem, heller ikke det der fransk-tyske papir, der seriøst argumenterer for nødvendigheden af at ændre traktaterne. Det ligger for eksempel, der var 2 ting. En mindre kommission. Rent faktisk siger Lisbon-traktaten, at vi skal kun have 2/3 af kommissærerne i forhold til medlemsstater. Det er medlemsstaterne, der enstemmigt, hver gang vi kommer til det, beslutter at suspendere den klausul, så alle beholder deres kommissærer. Rent faktisk har traktaten allerede forudset, kun 2/3 af landene, antallet af lande skal give det antal kommissærer, der er. Også parlamentets størrelse, der står degressiv proportionalitet, og så henviser det der papir til en efter ret nedslidt Oxford-model, som er ret uoverbevisende, og som har kun én konsekvens, at man omfordeler antallet af parlamentsmedlemmer fra de mindre og små lande til de 3-4 største. Og det er også derfor, at tyskerne nu starter om at gå ud over de 96, som er deres lov. Jeg siger bare, så den præmisse, der hedder, at man har et behov for at koble traktatsændringer på den proces, der virkelig er.
Men undskyld, det var heller ikke det, de sagde.
Nej.
Der var ikke nogen, der nævnte ordet traktatændring, meget bekendt. Nej. Altså pointen er, at du har gennemført de her ting uden traktaten, men det er der jo nogle lande, der ikke vil.
Præcis.
Apropos,
men
det som også Danmark sagde, ja.
Men den franske ambassadør sluttede med at sige, at han tror, at det europæiske råd i december etablerer et link. Det tror jeg ikke på.
Et link imellem udvidelse og reformer, der er ikke imellem udvidelse og traktatændringer. Det er der ingen, der vil. I hvert fald ikke den tyske regering officielt.
Okay, men jeg siger også bare...
Nej, det tror jeg er lidt vigtigt for forståelsen også i en dansk sammenhæng. Man kan godt diskutere reformer af EU, uden at man siger, at det skal være en traktatændring.
Det er også det, der er min pointe.
Ja, okay, så er vi enige med.
Den nuværende traktat indeholder de muligheder for at lave de reformer, der skal til.
Ja, det mener du så, men det er der så ikke alle nødvendigvis ved enige.
Jeg kan kun sige, hvad jeg mener.
Ja, det er klart.
Det er virkelig andet. Jeg vil også bare sige, men tilbage til det, I så nævner her, for jeg synes, at en af de helt store spørgsmål, det er så budgettet. Og næste MFF løber til 28, og hvis udvidelsen, som jeg tror, alle er nu klar over, bliver ikke i 2030, så er vi over i efterfølgende MFF med en indfasning.
Præcis.
Og vi har stadigvæk et loft, der hedder 1,4% på GDP. Og derfor er spørgsmålet overhovedet, og det er mere så til landbrug, om ikke en ændring af sekundærlovgivningen på landbruget for så vidt kan imødekomme de legitime bekymringer, I har nu for den nuværende landbrugsordning og de systemer, der er, vil helt sikkert uden også ændringer og udvidelse blive gennemset og ændret på det tidspunkt, når den her nuværende MFF udløber.
Hvad siger du til det? Altså den sidste del.
Jamen, jeg ved ikke helt, om jeg forstod spørgsmålet, men altså, jeg tænker, det kan jo sagtens forestille sig, at det kan rummes inden for det nuværende, og kommer jo en reform under alle omstændigheder, men altså, jeg tror lige så meget, at det her bliver markedsdrevet. Altså, hvis de skal være en del af det EU's marked, og de får fri adgang, og de er så konkurrencedygtige, som de er, så tror jeg, at det sætter gang i en proces i forhold til, skal de nu have hektarstøtte, som alle andre skal, og hvis ikke de skal det, hvad har det så konsekvenser for landbrugspolitikken for alle mulige andre? Jeg tror, det er i hvert fald en diskussion, vi har med os selv nu, fordi ellers så er der nogen, der kommer og trækker det ned over hovedet lige om lidt. Vi får, tror jeg, nogle rigtig store problemer i forhold til, eller udfordringer er den slags jo, den struktur, vi har med et produktionslandbrug, som producerer efter et marked, og så en meget, meget stor gruppe bedrifter, som de er der dybest set bare for at sørge for, at der er nogen, der bliver boende der, og de bliver boende ude i landdistrikterne. Og hvordan opretholder du det, eller hvordan laver du sådan en gradvis omlægning af hele det setup? Den udvikling er der, uanset om du har udvidelsen eller ej, men den bliver forstærket af udvidelsen.
Andre, der vil på banen? Lige for at vende tilbage til den der diskussion, vi lige havde omkring traktaten, for det er jo faktisk ret vigtigt, fordi, igen tilbage til Europakonferencen, det er spurgt Lars Løkke om det med reformer. Så svarede han jo med det samme. Han synes ikke, man skulle have en ny stor traktatændring. Hvor jeg så sagde til ham med det samme, jamen det er jo ikke det, som Tyskland ønsker. Altså den Baerbock-tale, som jeg jo så selv overvejede. For det var jo netop de her ting, hun legnede op med, at man skulle se på jo så parlamentet, der behøver man jo ikke nogen traktat, man se på antallet af kommissærer, behøver man ikke nogen traktatændring, kvalificeret flertal med passerelle, behøver man heller ikke nogen traktatændring. Så det er jo ligesom også lidt vigtigt for, at vi så ikke får i Danmark en anden debat om, vi så siger som slags, hvad skal vi sige, stråmand, at vi vil ikke have nogen traktatændring. Når det vi egentlig andre foreslår er noget helt andet, nemlig noget meget mere specifikt. Så det tror jeg i hvert fald også i den kommende, måske også når den europapolitiske aftale, så bliver offentliggjort vel ret interessant til, hvad siger de så rent faktisk om de her helt specifikke ting.
Men er det ikke allerede interessant, hvad de siger nu? Altså kommunikationen, det er jo altid sådan med politikere. Man opfinder sine egne udtryk. Altså for eksempel udtrykket husregler.
Ja.
Det fortolkes ind i, at det er traktatændringer, men altså en husregel kan jo sådan set være mange ting, at når vi får nogle nye ind, når vi får nogle nye bofælder, de brugte ikke mit børneeksempel, men altså et roommate-eksempel, så skal vi kigge på husreglerne. Og som du siger, husreglerne er jo en bred definition. Det kan jo være mange ting. Så det er jo politikersprog, for det sparker vi lidt længere ned, og der bliver det spændende at læse, hvad der kommer til at stå i Europapolitisk aftale.
Jeg tænker i virkeligheden, at når vi snakker alt det her om traktatændringer, passerelle og sådan noget, så er det jo noget, vi Europa-nørder synes er vigtigt.
Du mener ikke, at passerelle er noget, som almindelige mennesker synes er voldsomt?
Jeg tror, hvis jeg var statsminister...
Jeg vil dog sige, jeg har nogle gange fået folk synes, det er interessant, hvis man siger, at det er ligesom, man går ned i det her fantastiske supermarked eller indkøbscenter i Paris, hvor man så har en passerelle. Hvad er det? Det er, når man kører op af elevatoren op på 5. sal, når man kører hele vejen ned, for at komme over den anden bygning, så er der en bro, en gangbro. Så kan folk godt synes, det er interessant med en passerelle, men ellers så falder det til
men jeg tror i virkeligheden, at kommunikationsopgaven jo meget anden og meget større, og den kommer til at bestå af nogle forskellige elementer i de forskellige lande. Der er ikke nogen tvivl om, at i Polen vil sådan noget som landbrugspolitik fylde rigtig, rigtig meget. For andre vil sikkerhedsdimensionen af det fylde noget. Og så vil der være nogen, der vil være interesseret i, hvad koster det, og hvad kan vi selv få ud af det. Og det er jo de der balancer, vi skal finde ud af at have kommunikeret omkring det her. Og spørgsmålet er jo, hvor længe vi har sikkerhedsudfordringen, kan man sige, ikke? Eller bliver den forstærket lige pludselig, så kan det jo føre til, at den der dato, du går rundt og ønsker dig så inderligt, den pludselig opstår.
Altså, hvornår EU er klar, ikke hvornår EU skal optage.
Whatever. Altså, alt det her kan jo blive påvirket af, hvad der sker rundt om os. Og lige nu er det jo den sikkerhedspolitiske dimension, der flytter det her. og gør, at vi skal overkomme alle de der 1000 alle lange møder i mødelokalerne i Bruxelles de næste år, ikke? Og ændrer det sig, ja, så kan det jo ændre alle mulige former for diskurser. Ja.
Og nu hvor I er og slår jeres folder, altså er det så Ukraine, eller er folk godt, er det siddet ind, undskyld mit sprog, at der er altså mange andre lande? Altså jeg taler med mange mennesker til Albanien, hvem har dog inviteret dem, og hvor langt er de kommet? Altså er der ikke også en udfordring der? Jamen, eller ved dit bagland, at det er Bosnien-Herzegovina, det er Moldova, det er så videre derudad?
Altså mit bagland ved stort set alt.
Ja, det er klart, fordi du fortæller om det, ja.
Vi har, Lykke, det ved du godt, vi har de klogeste medlemmer, der overhovedet er, så der er slet ikke grænser for den viden, der er. Men det jeg kan sige, det er jo noget, vi møder i vores europæiske organisationer. Også, ikke? Det er klart, den som vi er medlemmer i, der er det jo ikke bare EU-medlemsland, der er det hele Europa, så de her diskussioner fylder jo på mange stræk. Det man kan sige, som fylder i europæisk fagbevægelse, nogle af de her spørgsmål, det er jo spørgsmål for eksempel om social- og arbejdsmarkedspolitikken. Der bliver vi jo typisk set som værende lidt defensiv, og det er vi også på den dagsorden. Det er klart, der er mange, der siger, hvis der bare er nogen, der nævner traktatændringer eller kvalificeret flertal, så er man klar til at smække nogle af de her ting op. Der er vores forhåbning jo, der tror vi jo egentlig, at vi i Danmark egentlig er ret enige også med den danske regering i, at det er altså spørgsmål, vi holder lidt på nationale hænder. Men det er altså spørgsmål, der kommer op her i mange sammenhæng, i hvert fald når vi kigger på det fra europæisk fagbevægelses side.
Og så er det jo klart, at du ikke for de optagelser af de andre lande vil koste kassen og vil kræve en markant ændring af landbrugspolitikken, men ikke desto mindre, vi landene jo selvfølgelig har stemmeret, og de skal jo også med i processen, og der vil også være diskussion omkring hele retsstatsgrundlaget for om EU kan fungere ved et land som, vil alle lande være i stand til at leve op til EU's retsstatsprincipper. Det var jo noget, som han også var inde på, som værende sådan helt centralt. Nu skal jeg lige ind, I står og hopper, jeg vil lige have dig med ind her. Ja.
Tak for det. Jeg hedder Nadia Olsen, jeg kommer fra 3F, og jeg er enig, sjovt nok, i meget af det, som Johan siger, bortset fra, at han har de klogeste medlemmer. Det kan vi diskutere bagefter. Og nu bliver nævnt det her med både lastbilchauffører og landmænd, som er på barrikaderne i Polen i øjeblikket, og det er jo vores medlemmers fagområder. Og vi anser det jo for afgørende, at EU's arbejdsmarked er klar med værktøjer til at sikre fair vilkår på EU's indre marked efter udvidelserne. Og vi har jo på nuværende tidspunkt faktisk store udfordringer, og vi kæmper stadigvæk med at finde løsninger efter østudvidelsen i 2004. Så mit spørgsmål til jer er, hvad kan EU selv gøre for at blive klar til et forandret EU og et forandret europæisk arbejdsmarked efter eventuelle udvidelser? Tak.
Sådan, det var dejligt præcist.
Ja.
Johan, du må på banen.
Skal jeg starte? Jamen altså, det er jo jeg synes, det er meget enig i præmissen i spørgsmålet. Der er jo stadigvæk veje at gå. Mange af de diskussioner, vi har i dag, er jo på et meget store klinge. Det er klart, at EU har jo nogle muligheder, uden at vi snakker om kompetencedeling osv. Altså, der er for eksempel, hvis vi snakker etablering af ID-kort, vi snakker etablering af, altså være stærkere med den europæiske arbejdsmarkedsmyndighed, så har EU nogle værktøjer, man kan bruge til at håndhæve de regler, der er. Det skal man jo ikke, det er jo ikke kun et udvidelsesspørgsmål, det handler sådan set også om meget af det, der er i dag, men der tror vi egentlig på, at uden at kaste alting op i luften, så er der faktisk nogle ret gode konkrete værktøjer. I har selv peget på nogle af dem, for eksempel ID-kort til vandrende arbejdstagere osv., som man altså kunne indføre i morgen, hvis der var politisk appetit på det. Og det er klart, det bliver jo et slagsmål mellem de forskellige medlemslande.
Vil du ind?
Ja, og udover vil jeg sige, altså alle de der klassiske politikområder, så kan vi jo faktisk også spille en rolle, os der står her. Det kan 3F også selv, fordi vi har jo de her kolleger i vores europæiske organisationer. Vi kan jo lave masser af kapacitetstræning. Det gør man både på embedsmandsniveau, men det kan man jo også gøre på civilsamfundets niveau. Og det tror jeg ikke, man skal undervurdere. Altså det her med, hvordan agerer vi især i nogle lande, som måske ikke har været de fødte demokratier. Hvordan indretter man overhovedet et samfund? Hvordan indretter du også et civilsamfund med den påvirkning af det politiske system, der skal være? Så der er ikke nogen grund til at sætte sig ned og vente på, at man bliver færdig med at definere i Bruxelles, hvordan skal vores fremtidige politikker se ud. Det er jo sådan set at gå i gang med at arbejde med kolleger, det ved jeg også, I gør. Altså det gør vi også. Og fortsætte det arbejde frem mod et endeligt medlemskab. Så vi har jo også en rolle at spille her for at sikre, at man får absorberet alt det lovgivning.
Og det var ikke nede på baren.
Og det var ikke nede på baren og alle reglerne.
En kommentar til det?
Jamen, jeg tænker bare, at der er jo på altså de store dagsordner, digitalisering og grøn omstilling og sådan noget, der vil det jo forskubbe vægten også på europæisk plan. Altså fordi nogle af de nye lande, jeg tror ikke, de har set lyset helt på den samme måde som det nuværende. Og nogle af dem, som føler sig trængt af nogle af de forslag, altså hele den grønne omstilling og være klar til det digitale område, de ser jo også nogle trusler i det her. Så man skal adressere de bekymringer i de nuværende medlemslande nu. Ellers så tror jeg, at det bliver også i nogle lande en forhindring for, at de overhovedet synes, at det er en god idé at udvide EU.
Ja, så det er i hvert fald ikke nogen selbstläufer, som tyskerne vil sige. Hvordan oversætter man det? Det er ikke noget automatik i det her.
Nej.
Skal vi lige have lige inde på falderebet her, lige have jeres bekymringsrunden. Vi har været inde med perspektiverne og så videre, men hvor ser I så, jeg stillede jo det samme spørgsmål til Koopman, hvor ser I sådan den største hurdle for, at vi kommer igennem det her på den gode, rette måde, altså både med at få EU fortsat kan fungere, men så også få optaget de her lande. Hvad holder der vågen om natten, når vi tænker på udvidelsen?
Helt sikkert public opinion i de gamle EU-medlemslande. Det er det, der flytter en statsminister. Altså hvis der bliver for meget ballade der, så bliver der også ballade inde ved bordet. Hvis man kan mærke, at okay, der er en opbakning hver gang vi laver en rundspørg, så ser det meget godt ud, så kommer man hen over de der bump. Hvis der bliver for meget ballade i befolkningerne, så har vi ikke den udvidelse, vi gerne skulle have. Så kommunikationen omkring det her, og hvordan du skaber opbakning og forståelse for, at udvidelse er nødvendig. Altså, gå ud og spørge folk ude på gaden, de aner ikke, at den her samtale foregår.
Nej, det var også derfor, jeg sagde det med Albanien, med mig inviteret dem, og lige vil sige. Skal vi tage dig først?
Jeg tror måske, jeg har sagt det. Altså, de polske landmænd, altså lige om lidt, så er det alle mulige andre landmænd. Altså, hvis man først begynder at åbne op, og ikke på en eller anden måde har tydeliggjort, at der er nogle lige konkurrencevilkår, og i hvert fald, at der kommer en gradvis åbning, og en hel masse af de bekymringer. Hvis man ikke adresserer dem, så tror jeg, så ender det med at blive en drøm hos nogen.
Men der kan jeg jo så, det drilske modsvar vil jo være, hvorfor skal man begynde at diskutere vanskelige beslutninger, før man reelt har behov for det? Altså det er derfor igen tilbage til, at man på en eller anden måde kan få en plan for, hvornår man kigger på det her. Så vil man sætte sig selv under pres, ellers kan man sige, okay, så er der ikke nogen grund til at kigge på det her i forløbet, fordi de der lande er jo ikke klar endnu, og så kører det ligesom om, og så kommer vi ind i næste budgetperiode eller et eller andet. Altså der er jo noget her, hvor der er en fare for, at vi ikke rigtig... Hvis bare modler through, så får vi ikke taget de der diskussioner.
Nej, men det kan godt være, men jeg tror, hvis ikke du tager diskussionen, hvis ikke også... Ja.
Johan, du får det sidste ord.
Jamen altså, nu må jeg jo ikke sige traktatændringer, fordi det har Jens ikke haft så meget succes med. Så jeg vil sige for overambitiøse husregler. Altså, at vi sætter noget i værk omkring institutionel reform, som er urealistisk og som befolkningen ikke er med på. Og så tror jeg bare, hvis vi snakker risici, og det skal måske være sådan den positive afslutningsreplik herfra. Altså, hvis vi kigger på, uanset om det er ny teknologi eller EU-udvidelser, så klart, så kan der være noget skepsis mange dele af samfundet. Men altså, når alt kommer til alt, så må man sige, hvis vi kigger fra industriens side på den sidste østudvidelse, 10 lande for 20 år siden, det er 70 milliarder, vi har i eksport til de lande. Det er der altså nogle gode arbejdspladser i. Det kan jo også være, altså nu sidder vi og snakker det som en kæmpe byrde. Vi snakker som om, der kan komme en stor byrde. Der er jo også, og de ting skal vi jo tage utroligt seriøst. Der kan jo også være på den helt lange bane nogle muligheder i det her.
Og det var jo også det, han sagde, Koopman fra kommissionen, og det var sådan set også det, den franske ambassadør var inde på, altså de her gevinster, der også lå geopolitisk ved, at man så kunne gennemføre udvidelsen. Nu står der i programmet, at jeg skal gennemgå, hvad der er anderledes i den her udvidelse, end der var før. Så nu kommer lige en sådan halv times gennemgang af det, så I ikke når hjem overhovedet, og dem af os, der skal ned til Krystalgade og markere jo selvfølgelig så den anden 9. november, vi kommer for sent. Nej, det bliver ganske kort. Der er i hvert fald 3 ting, jeg synes, der slog mig, da inden det her det startede, og som jeg egentlig synes også står tilbage efterfølgende. Hvis man siger, at den her udvidelse er en geopolitisk ting, som EU skal gennemføre, man er helt oppe på den store klinge, så bliver man altså også nødt til at erkende, at det ikke bare klares ved hjælp af fedtspil. Der vil selvfølgelig være markante forandringer. Det vil være en transformation så at komme igennem det her. Det vil altså være et anderledes EU, banalt det, jeg siger nu, end da vi startede, men det skal altså bare siges, det skal diskuteres allerede nu. Det andet er det her med det meritbaserede. Og det var også derfor, jeg drillede ham lidt. Når man siger noget hele tiden med meritbaseret, så er det nok, fordi man alligevel ved, at man bliver skudt på af nogen. Og der var jo i hvert fald den her interessante diskussion op til, at kommissionens pakke kom her i går. Det var, hvad gør man med Bosnien-Herzegovina? Hvorfor var det så vigtigt, at man også har noget til Bosnien-Herzegovina i denne pakke? Jamen det er jo, fordi der er en betydelig bekymring for Vestbalkan, at vi nu kun taler Ukraine, Moldova og Georgien. Så selvfølgelig indfrier har de jo reformeret sig på bestemte måder, men der var bare også politisk pres på kommissionen for så at levere på det punkt, og så kom de med det der egentlig meget elegante kompromis, synes jeg, at ja, vi lover dem optagelsesforhandlinger, men de skal gøre noget mere, inden de så rent faktisk kommer ind i lokalet. Men den dynamik vil vi se udspille sig, altså et clash mellem geopolitikken og så det, vi kalder den meritbaserede tilgang. Det så vi jo også sidste udvidelsesrunde, den store i 2002, altså Big Bang. Man startede jo med at sige, at det skulle være regatta-modellen, ikke? Så vi skulle sidde der og ro ud, og så ville dem, der så starte samtidig, og så ville nogle skibe eller både være i stand til at komme i havn før. Og så endte det jo med pludselig det store geopolitik efter Kosovo, og kunne man adskille landene, og skulle man hul i kortet, og kunne man optage Estland og Litauen, men ikke Letland, og så videre derudad. Landene havde forskellige darlings. Nogle kæmpede mere for balterne, end der kæmpede for slovenerne, og de logikker vil jo også være der. Så selvom man siger, at det er meritbaseret, det skal det også være, så kan man jo ikke tage politikken ud af udvidelsespolitikken. Den vil jo selvfølgelig på et eller andet tidspunkt så også stikke sit hoved frem. Og som det sidste, så er det med den offentlige opbakning, som I jo også var inde på. Og der vil det i hvert fald være ekstremt afgørende, at man ikke gentager den fejl, som man havde i Big Bang-udvidelsen, hvor man sådan troede, det var mere eller mindre givet, at folk vil bakke op om det. I hvert fald var det jo interessant, at man kom frem til folkeafstemninger omkring forfatningstraktaten, både i Holland og i Frankrig, så røg det med et brag. Givetvis også af alle mulige andre årsager, men den såkaldte polske håndværker spillede i hvert fald en central rolle. Så det må jo på en eller anden måde, den der plan D, man så lavede efterfølgende, som Signe i hvert fald godt kan huske med dialog, og så kunne kommissionen ud og sammen med medlemsstater diskutere, hvad der var fordele og ulemper ved det ene og det andet. Den skal man nok tage før, end der måtte være kommet diverse udfordringer. For at bruge dit udtryk, der skal jo ikke nødvendigvis være folkeafstemninger, men der skal selvfølgelig være opbakning for en statsminister at gøre sådan her, når vi kommer så frem. Så det var bare lige for at give det med. Tak fordi I holdt ud. Tak til vores splendid trojka heroppe. Og så er det jo naturligvis et tema, vi vil følge meget intenst, og selvfølgelig også de næste 20 år. Ja, og det vil jo være sådan, medmindre jeg får min dato. Men det kan vi jo så diskutere på et senere tidspunkt. Godt, tusind tak fordi I kom. Og tak til kommissionen.